Hello, and welcome to our afternoon webinar on metacognition. We have about a minute or so before we get started. So in the meantime, find the chat button and share with us where you're joining from today. We'll get started in just a moment. But as we wait for a few more to join us, find your chat button. Share with us where you're joining from today. So I'm coming to you from Louisiana. Let's see, we have Lauren from Florida. Carl from Connecticut. Kenneth is from California. Amelia, not so sunny, Tampa Bay. Let's see. Patty's joining us from Nebraska. John from New Jersey. Welcome. We're so glad y'all are here. Michael from Texas. Welcome. Lorenzo from South Carolina. Welcome. Glad you're here. Michael from San Antonio. Janet from Utah. Aaron from Arizona. So glad y'all are here. We have quite a few people joining us right now as well. As they continue, we're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome to Think About Your Thinking, Empowering Metacognitive Learners. So I was in a meeting right before I jumped on this webinar and someone asked me, what's your webinar today, Mandy? And I told them metacognition, and they replied, that sounds deep. We'll look at it from the instructor teaching lens, so it won't be so deep, but we'll look at a little theory and look at a little instruction and how it all works together. So first, to kick us off, look at the image on the screen. In the chat, share with us, what do you think is happening? What might this student be thinking about at this moment? Share with us in the chat what you see on the screen. Sounds like I should have studied video. He's playing a game, maybe strategizing. Absolutely. He's thinking, did I pass? Thinking about an issue. Oh, maybe taking a test. Absolutely. What am I doing? Do I know this? Right? He looks a little overwhelmed. Okay. Now, what happens if I show you the rest of the picture? What do you see that's happening now? Deep thinking, absolutely. Anticipation, studying, a Zoom call in a public place, right? Playing chess on the computer, he's learning, maybe he's on a call, possibly, maybe he's reading. So here's what's ironic. What you were just doing as you were looking at that picture was you were thinking about your thinking, right? So when you were guessing what the student might be feeling or wondering, you were engaging in metacognitive reasoning. Did you know that? Because you were interpreting the thinking process kind of behind the scenes. So it's the same kind of awareness that we want our students and our learners to develop, noticing what's going on in their minds, monitoring whether they're understanding, and evaluating what to try next. So as you notice some of your comments, you can think like, oh, I was thinking metacognitively. So let's take that a little bit deeper. So we're going to define metacognition. We're going to look at some key practices and then hopefully allow you to select one actionable strategy. I have about, I think, 6 or 8 shown. Hopefully you can take one of those with you to apply later today or tomorrow in your class. All right, so metacognition, like what is this? It's simply our ability to think about our own thinking, right? It means our students understand how they learn, not just what they're learning. Research shows that metacognitive awareness, things like knowing strategies, understanding your task, being aware of your own learning process, can significantly improve academic performance and efficiency. So when our students can monitor and guide themselves, they become more autonomous, confident, and effective learners. And because all the webinars in this first Tuesday of the month series deal with John Hattie's research on visible learning, the effect size of metacognitive strategies is 0.69. So the average effect size of anything that we do is 0.4. This is a 0.69. And the largest effects are found when our students use what's called online measures, things like think alouds, which we'll dive into a little bit later, self-reflection, as opposed to using offline strategies, which have a lower effect size, things like questionnaires. So let's keep going. So we know that this is a great strategy to use for our students to help improve learning and outcomes. But what makes up metacognition? So when we teach metacognition, we're really thinking about three core habits: the planning, the monitoring, and the evaluating. Right? So we want our students to begin a task with a plan. We want them to be able to check themselves as they go throughout that task, and then hopefully to be able to reflect at the end. We know that these steps help students catch misunderstandings earlier. It can help them manage their time, especially with projects, and apply strategies for more intentionality. Together, these three are the backbone of self-regulated learning. And as we go throughout today, if you have any information or insights or thoughts, drop them in the chat. This whole webinar series is about learning with and from each other. So let's dive a little bit deeper into planning. So when we talk about the first step of planning, which happens before students even begin a task in a class, right? Before they even come into our class and start working. Planning encourages our students and our learners to pause and think intentionally about their learning. It starts with things like activating prior knowledge, which we know is a key in any good instruction. Asking questions like, what do I already know about this topic? Or how does this connect to something I've learned before? So making those connections helps new learning feel meaningful. Planning also involves identifying those goals, right? So students really should be clear about what they're expected to learn and accomplish and what success even looks like. So you'll see this a lot of times with learning outcomes, learning objectives. You'll see it with success criteria, asking things like the student asking, what am I expected to accomplish or learn here? And then the last one is really selecting those strategies by deciding which tools or approaches help them be successful and how they're going to begin a task. So planning sets that strong foundation by prompting our students to ask, like, what is my plan before I start? Which is really great and relevant in career and technical education when we're looking at like that hands-on learning, like, what is my plan? Then we have the second piece, which is monitoring, right? So once our students begin working on a task, it shifts into this monitoring phase. And this monitoring phase is about checking in on their understanding during the learning. So not after the learning, but during the activity. So students can actively ask themselves things like, does this make sense? Do I understand what I'm reading? It also includes things like noticing difficulties or confusion or recognizing when something feels a little unclear. Like, where do they get stuck? Where is it not working for them as they were expected? So the key here is also awareness. When students are monitoring effectively, they don't just like push through confusion. They pause, adjust, maybe they reread, ask questions, seek help or support. This monitoring phases really helps our students engage and self-correct before those small misunderstandings become real big learning gaps. And the last of these three parts of metacognition, what it is evaluating. So this is when students focus on reflection and growth. So during evaluating, it asks students to really look back at their learning, consider the outcomes, like, did I meet my learning goal? How well did my strategy or my tools or my approach work for me? This step also helps our students identify strengths and areas of improvement, like what went well, what was challenging, what did I struggle with? And more importantly, evaluating connects today's learning to future success, which is what we want with current technology. It's that transfer of knowledge and skills, because it encourages our students to think about what they would do differently next time and what strategies, tools, approaches they want to keep, and some they might want to change. The reflective thinking here also is going to help our students become more intentional and independent learners over time. All right. So my question to you, why does all of that matter? So we talked about planning, monitoring, and evaluating, and I have some more that we'll talk about. But Type in the chat, why does that matter for our students and that learning process? Let's see what we have coming in the chat. Why does metacognition really matter? Yeah, Amelia, yeah, absolutely. Guidance for learning, right? Yeah, and Janine's talking about the value of the instruction. Absolutely. So as we think about the planning, the monitoring, the evaluating, we're also thinking about the critical thinking, like Kimberly noted. Let's see, Nikki's talking about makes learning more efficient and effective. Absolutely. And we're going to start to look at some strategies that we know are really effective and efficient. Christopher's talking about like helps solve problems when encountered, which is a skill that we want our students to have in the real world, helps them understand their thinking. Christopher's talking about how it develops sympathetic teaching skills. Absolutely. So we know that these three components, planning, monitoring, evaluating, matter because they impact student success. So like I said, the John Hattie research has a 0.69 effect size, but we also know that students who intentionally plan and review their learning perform better, they think more critically, and they feel more confident, things that you all noted in the chat, particularly in those high challenge fields like engineering, like STEM education. So these skills also increase motivation, help students transfer their learning across classes and real world tasks, which I feel like y'all all read my cheat sheet because that's what all of you posted in the chat. Okay, let's walk through some scenarios, what this might look like. So we're going to look at planning first. So that planning piece of metacognition. So here is the scenario. We have a student in an engineering design class. So one of those higher level classes. He's building a prototype or she's building a prototype. And immediately after receiving the project, they start building the prototype immediately after receiving the project brief. They haven't reviewed the design constraints, sketched a potential solution, or created a materials list. Midway through the build, the student realizes that they are missing key components and must start over. So when we think about the metacognition, especially the planning, what evidence of planning do you see in this scenario? And just as importantly, what evidence of planning is missing in this scenario? Type that in the chat. Let's see what evidence of planning you see in the scenario or what evidence might be missing. Yeah, Nikki said there isn't any planning, right? No upfront planning, right, Jason? So what planning did they miss? They didn't identify goals nor select strategies or tools or approaches, right? He doesn't have a materials list of what he needs. He doesn't even have like a potential like solution. Yeah, list of Lorenzo's talking about a list of key components. There's no outline yet. There is no planning or review the constraints at all. Exactly. So those are things that they could have done up front that would have addressed metacognition and helped the scenario prepare. Yeah. Janine, somebody need a roadmap, a blueprint, plan, objective list, right? Something. Okay, let's look at this one from the monitoring list. So now we have our plan. Let's look at this from monitoring. So during a patient vitals simulation, a student quickly completed all required material measurements. They record numbers on a chart without double checking whether the results make sense based on the patient's symptoms. Even when something looks off, this student continues moving through the checklist without pausing to reassess or ask for clarification. Do you see evidence of monitoring in this scenario? Or tell us what's missing, just like we did before. Yeah, Janine, I don't see really evidence of monitoring here either. So what could be missing? Yeah, there's no check for understanding. Absolutely. Yeah, there's none. So what could they have done to check for monitoring, right? There's no critical thinking here. No monitoring, no understanding. Things they didn't look at to see if the results made sense based on the patient's symptoms. No debugging, right? Wasn't properly assessed. They didn't notice difficulties. They didn't ask themselves, is it making sense? Right? Lauren's talking about there was no pause and reflect here. Christopher talking about as an EMT, this hurts, right? Lorenzo, understanding the purpose of the simulation could have helped with that monitoring phase. Absolutely. All right, let's try one more. And we're now thinking about this from, yeah, right? There's no clear direction. All right, let's think about this from the scenario. Same questions are going to ask at the end. So after preparing a plated dish for a culinary practical, the student submits it to the instructor and immediately begins cleaning up. They did not taste their dish, compare it to the rubric, or evaluate presentation choices. When asked how they think they did, the student shrugs and says, hopefully okay. What evidence of evaluation do you see? Or tell us what is missing in terms of evaluation. Yeah, Monica, right? There's no evaluating taking place here. So what could we have seen here? Like that one sentence. Yeah, they didn't taste their food. That's what I was thinking. The first thing they could have done was taste their food to see if it tasted like it was supposed to taste. If it was missing anything. What was the criteria they were supposed to use exactly? There was no feedback. The content, the strengths, evaluation, all missing. No personal buy-in. Probably so if they just shrugged and were like, ah, hopefully okay. Salt and sugar look alike. Yeah. Does not have a clear understanding. There's no thoughtful ideas there. Absolutely. Yeah, taste, analyze, adjust, and taste again. That didn't happen. Check to see if the content met the goal and not identifying the strengths, what worked well. Yeah, you're all on the right track. So now that we kind of identified metacognition, we looked at the three components of it, and we applied the three components to these scenarios. Let's look at some strategies that we can use. Now, this is a great time if you have an additional strategy that meets this metacognition idea, put it in the chat, share with us so that we can learn with and from each other. So when I think about these metacognitive strategies, again, my teaching, like my goal was always to help my students become aware of how they were thinking, not just like what we were supposed to be learning that day. So strategies like think alouds, which I've seen this a lot in classes that provide a lot of like step-by-step procedures. So having students record their voice of like the step-by-step procedures and what they're thinking about, how they're solving the problem. You can also do things like checklist, like planning before learning, and some of those self-questionings really allow me to model and reinforce that internal dialogue that our students can use. So even in a session when I'm teaching, like stopping to ask myself, like, I wonder if this makes sense, or what am I missing here? Or how could this go differently? Help our students build that metacognition for themselves. So intentionally building in moments where students can monitor their understanding. They can analyze their mistakes. They can compare strategies so they can recognize when learning's working and when it's not. Helps shift our students from being like passive recipients of information to more active managers of their own thinking. So like I mentioned, I love thinking aloud so you can hear students work through the process of solving a problem. Checklists are really great. Did we do this first, this next, and this finally, the end? Maybe some goal setting templates, those monitoring prompts, like what's working, what's not working. Things like reflection journals at the end. These are a great way to sum up a project if you're working on project-based learning, to have reflection journals about how the build went, how the testing went. They can work through each phase in that reflection journal or prompt. Even those self-evaluation rubrics, I don't know if you've given your students rubrics before. I always felt like when I gave my students rubrics, they were much more they were harder on themselves than I was as the instructor, which was always interesting to me. But self-evaluation rubrics that they can walk through those steps on their own, and even teaching each other. So we know that when you can teach, you really understand the content, you've thought through the content. And so having them teach each other is another metacognitive strategy. I've seen a few come in the chat as well as some strategies here Here, when a student asks me to check a weld, I first ask them what they think. Absolutely, Michael. That's always so interesting to get their perspective first. Like I was saying, my students were always way harder on themselves than I was as an instructor. Also, always encourage a rose and a thorn review of the experience. Do an after action review to determine pitfalls in instruction. Ask an open question and let the silence stand so students are almost compelled to answer, right, Janine? Sometimes that silence is the most difficult thing for us as teachers, but can really allow space for students to reflect and provide some insight. Michael's also talking about encourages students to check each other before asking him about their weld. Absolutely. Sometimes teachers call that, what is it, like 3 before me? And so you have to like check it yourself against some type of self-evaluation rubric or checklist, and you have to have a peer check it, and then the teacher will check it. Absolutely. Any other strategies y'all like to use when you think about metacognition? Have you thought about metacognition that we use in our classroom? This seems to be another one of those tools that we don't intentionally think about, but we do just in best practice. Yeah. Lorenzo's talking about summarize what I'm teaching in your own words. Absolutely. Yeah, Michael said thanks for that 3 before me. Yeah. I love the chat. This is my favorite part of the webinars when we can share our own practices of what we're doing. Sometimes for me as an instructor, it reaffirms what I'm doing. Like, okay, other people are doing this too. And sometimes I get some really great ideas of ways that I can modify what I'm doing to make it even better. All right, we have about 8 minutes left. So let's start to wrap this up. So let's think about the strategies that we just talked about and some that you saw in the chat. In the chat, share with us 3 strategies that you plan to try. So for me, definitely try more of the thinking aloud to hear the process. Also thinking the self-reflection prompts always work well for me. And maybe even adding some checklists. I haven't done that as much, but checklists usually come in handy. Yeah, so we're also talking about ask students, especially group activities, if other groups will make sense of their response. Yep. I'm really talking about the think aloud, group checklist. Patty's talking about teaching others. Absolutely. 3 before me. More focus on the managing and evaluation, asking AI to make a checklist so that it's easier for them. Absolutely, Lauren. Tyan's also talking about AI to build a goal setting template per task. That's something I would like to try as well. I haven't done that yet. It's a good idea. The outline, checklist, reflecting, action. Awesome. Now we have 2. What are 2 new understandings? I will say, like, I've done some research on this when I worked at a research institute, but some things that stood out to me is I rarely break down metacognition into the 3 areas of planning, monitoring, and evaluating. And when I do and apply that to a lesson, I feel like it provides a little more clarity in terms of what I'm asking for my students at each part of the lesson. So that was a new understanding that I had, just putting this together, that to present on this in some type of coherent fashion. Yeah, Lauren's talking about the way it broke it down into 3 parts and the focus on this more. Yeah, I kind of had that same aha or understanding about this. Also, the way I kind of looked at some of the strategies in terms of online and offline measures, that kind of helped me make sense of some of these. Yeah, utilizing metacognitive for Monica, absolutely. All right, and the last one. What is one implementation step you're going to take? So I'm going to start adding some think alouds to some student lessons so that I can really see their understanding of the process and hear it in their words and hopefully reduce misunderstandings, misconceptions a little earlier on in the process. Yeah, check with STEM, STEAM, STREAM, absolutely. What implementation step are you going to take? Yeah, Lauren's going to start implementing checklists in the lessons. Absolutely. I'll give you just a second for a few more and let's see if any more come in. So let's start to recap just for the sake of time as well. Some others coming in. Lorenzo's talking about like think alouds, checklists. Yeah, absolutely. I feel like those might be some of those strategies that provide a larger effect size, and anything that's kind of low prep, high reward is what I've kind of really shifted my teaching towards in the last probably 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Low prep, high reward is where I like to go. Yeah, looking at the standards, absolutely. All right. So we identified metacognition, what it is. We looked at those three components, and then we also found some type of strategy that we can implement right away to align with the LOs of today's webinar. Before we get to the final step in today's webinar, I would love to encourage you to sign up for next month, where we're going to talk about scaffolding. So this session is going to dive into scaffolding and ways that we can support our students and they master those really complex tasks. So we're going to look how we design instruction that can really provide just the right amount of support for our students at the right time, and then start to gradually remove some of those supports as students build confidence and competence. So if you'd like to join us again on May 5th at 2 p.m. Central Time. You'll also be receiving an email. If you received an email for this webinar, you'll on that email list to remind you to sign up for this in about the week before. Also, if you're on this call today, you are going to receive the QR code to sign up for next week, the PowerPoint from today, the recording of today's session, a certificate of attendance. So you'll be receiving all of those links in a follow-up email within 48 hours. Also, as part of this, we always love to make these sessions better. Tell us what you thought. So if you wouldn't mind scanning that QR code on the screen with the camera app on your phone, and then tell us how we did. We would love to see you again next month on May 5th. And don't forget, in 48 hours, look for an email from me, Mandy Green. And we hope you have a great afternoon. It was an honor and a joy to learn with you this afternoon on metacognition, and we can't wait to talk about scaffolding in May. See y'all then.